Okay, we're listening to testimony from Mike Pickens. He is a neighbor of the defendants. He is a neighbor, and we are hearing testimony of how he, the day before the shooting, the day before the injunction hearing, he went into Amanda Colley's house. He broke in, he stole some sex toys, and he was furious about what he found because he was sure that that implicated an affair that was happening. Even though they were in the process of getting divorced, he felt that he was being wronged. With me, Francey Hakes, criminal defense attorney. Francey, so before the break, you and I were discussing about premeditation and how intent can be formed in an instant. Earlier, we were hearing how the defendant was furious after the injunction hearing, and then that's what set him off. But right now, we're hearing testimony that he was actually furious the night before when he went into the house and found the sex toys, which I think, based on what you're saying, goes to the prosecution's argument that premeditation was in the process of being formed and that this could not be a heat of passion type of killing. But I would love your take as a criminal defense attorney on this one.
That's right, Carissa. One quick thing. I'm a former prosecutor. I don't practice criminal law.
Okay, so then you and I are on the same page. I'm a former prosecutor, too. Uh-oh.
That's right. But from a prosecutor's perspective, I think that this witness has a ton of really good information that does, as you say, go to exactly what the state of Florida is trying to prove, and that is this was a premeditated killing, that this wasn't something done in the heat of passion, that it wasn't something he decided to do the instant he broke into the house or the instant that he stood over his estranged wife, but rather this was a man in a towering rage at the dissolve of his relationship, and the fact that she was trying to get a court to help her keep him away from her, and the fact that she was dating someone, all of which put him in a jealous rage. And this is very simply a matter of a man who couldn't stand the fact that he no longer had control of his wife, and he decided to take action.
Right, and you bring up a good point, right? He was in a jealous rage over losing control of his wife. So just for the viewers, you know, it's complicated for people to understand the difference between all the different types of murders and killings. You know, I mean, even when we take the bar exam, it's a complicated thing to learn, to study, to figure out how to select the right question of which kind of killing this is. So for the viewers, how would you explain a heat of passion killing? I mean, he's in a jealous rage. He's upset about losing his wife to someone else. How is that not heat of passion?
Well, Chris, as you know, the heat of passion killings typically take two forms, either a bar fight or the old scenario where you walk into the bedroom and see your spouse engaging in an affair with another person, and you kill them or one of them in that instant rage. That is what is known as manslaughter or some sort of passion killing. The premeditated killing, I think that the prosecution's case is building toward here, is different because this was a man who had a plan. He gets a gun. He breaks into her house on more than one occasion, including when he actually ends up killing her and her friend. He hunts for her throughout the house. That is not the same as the kind of crime of passion where you find your spouse in bed with someone else and you engage in some sort of murderous behavior.
Right, and would you say that it matters that, you know, he intended to hunt down the boyfriend and then he ended up killing two others?
I don't think so. I mean, it's intent to kill, and that can be transferred.
Hold that thought. We have to go to a quick break, but you're right, it's intent to kill. So stick with us. We'll continue this discussion after the break. Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Carissa Kranz. Right now, we are following the James Colley case out of Florida. It's the death penalty case. It's our main trial today. It is the one we were following very, very closely. The prosecution is still putting on their case. Before the break, we were listening to testimony from Mike Pickens. He is a neighbor of the defendant. And we were hearing Mike tell the story of the night before the killings happened. Remember, James Colley is standing trial for killing his wife, Amanda Colley, and her best friend, Linda, because, or Lindy is how we're referring to her, because his wife was having an affair. Although they were in the process of getting divorced, he felt justified in getting upset that she was cheating. The day of the killings, there was a court injunction hearing where he was told to stay away from her. He got in trouble for burning all of her clothes in the yard. With me, Francey Hakes, former federal prosecutor, and you know me, I'm a former prosecutor as well. I don't know if this guy stands much of a chance, but we're going to try to break this down for you. It's a death penalty trial, so obviously the defense is going to have mitigating factors to try to at least knock it down in sentencing, if not now. We did hear before that the defense was going to use an Ambien defense. We have heard recently that they are going to be abandoning that defense. However, on break, Francey and I were discussing whether or not the defendant would take the stand and strategy on that. Francey, hey, what do you think about that? Would you, if you were a criminal defense attorney, I know you're a former prosecutor, if you were, how would you play this? Would you put him on the stand?
I don't think so, Carissa. I think it's all risk, no reward, because the state in this case has a really easy job if he takes the stand. If it was me, I would take him moment by moment by moment, starting about 24 hours before the killings, and asking him what he was doing. So you picked up the gun, you opened the door, you walked up the stairs, and take him through the killings, literally moment by moment, in a way that will make it clear to the jury that at any one of those moments, he could have turned and walked away and didn't, and that's premeditation. So I don't think he'll testify. I'd be really surprised.
So your strategy might be right. He might not testify. But on the flip side of that, I would, depending on his reaction, if I were his attorney and I had the opportunity to sit with him and break it down with him behind closed doors before putting him on the stand, and I saw him break down, I would put my client on the stand because I would want the jury to see emotion in a real man. Because unfortunately, when we watch the prosecution put on their case, all we see is the monster that the prosecution's building, and that's not going to serve him well in the death penalty phase if we get a conviction. Nonetheless, the prosecution is still putting on their case, so we're going to go back into the courtroom. We have more testimony from Mike Pickens. Remember, he is the neighbor that the defendant confided in the night before the killings when he broke into the house and stole some sex toys and went to him and said, see, this proves he was having an affair. This proves she's cheating. But they were already in the process of getting separated and divorced anyway. Let's take a look. That's Mike Pickens. He is the neighbor of the defendant, and he's giving testimony and insight of the defendant's state of mind the night before the murders happened. This is important because this goes to the prosecution's case of premeditation. With me is Francey Hakes, former federal prosecutor. Francey, did we lose her? Hey, okay, thought we lost you for a second there. So we're hearing how intent is being formulated the night before, and then we're also hearing how he texted him after the murders, saying, hey, and said, hey, you should turn yourself in, right? I mean, what do you make of the jury state, just the jurors listening to this, and the fact that he knew about it and didn't call the police himself to tell him that the defendant admitted a killing to him?
Well, you can see Mr. Pickens' nerves in a couple of respects. First, he's chewing gum on the witness stand, which I'm from Georgia, not a judge ever I practiced in front of would have allowed a witness to come into court chewing gum. He would have said something like, this is not a ballpark, it's a courtroom. But anyway, but he's also compulsively drinking water. And I think that he must be feeling some guilt. He took that photograph that surely added to the defendant's rage, knowing that his wife's new boyfriend was cutting what he, I'm sure, thought of as his lawn. I think the testimony is part of the prosecution's pyramid, right? You start at the bottom and you build all the way to the top when you're trying to prove something like premeditation. And here you've got discussions with this neighbor that went on the day before, just one more chink in the link of the chain of premeditation with that photograph that was sent to the defendant's sister and that the defendant presumably saw. So I think it's pretty strong so far, Carissa.
Right, and you know what's interesting that if maybe not everyone knows is that both of them, both James Colley and Amanda Colley, they were estranged. They were in the middle of separation. There was a court injunction that day to keep him away from her. Both of them were seeing other people at the time. She was seeing Lamar Dobbins, and he was supposedly seeing someone else as well. So what's really interesting is this is a man who just seems to be on his own ego run of wanting to be in control of the whole situation, and he can't stand losing control. Because it's not like he was here being loyal to his wife that was leaving him. He had his own relationship going on at the time, too. So it just sort of goes to his messed up, you know, convoluted human experience that's going on, you know, in any case and in any trial. There's, you know, multiple levels of personalities and so many layers to a person you have to peel like an onion. And here we're listening and we're learning as we watch this trial how complicated this James Colley figure is. He is like an onion, and as you peel away each layer, it makes you want to cry. It really does.
You're absolutely right, Carissa. And you said something so critical, and that is control. This is obviously for him a relationship that is all about control. And he cannot get over the fact that his wife is moving on with her life, that she doesn't want him around anymore, that someone else is, you know, tending to his lawn. And I think it just caused him to go into this kind of rage
Killing
mode.
rage.
That's right, a killing rage. And he didn't care who he killed so long as he proved that he was the one in control.
And in the end, it may be he's killing himself, because this is a death penalty trial, and we'll see what happens. But he's clearly, you know, the one that pulled the trigger. So it's all coming down to intent and premeditation, and whether or not the prosecution can prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt on whether or not the actual intent required to prove the highest level of the crime is enough, you know, for jury deliberations. We're going to continue following this case along with what's happening in the courtroom while the courtroom is on a quick break. But before we do that, we're going to go to today's top crime stories. We're listening to testimony of Lamar Doberly. This is the boyfriend of Amanda Colley, the estranged wife of the defendant, James Colley. And right now we're listening to him go through on the stand, blow by blow, what happened, the moments leading up to the double murders, the murder of his wife, Amanda Colley, and her best friend, Lindy Dobbins. We are hearing Lamar Doberly discuss, through question and answer, how he broke into the house, which goes to one of the charges of burglary. With me, former federal prosecutor Francey Hakes. Francey, I want to discuss this with you. You know, this is a double murder, so we were hearing earlier testimony of the actual killings through the medical examiner, but right now we're hearing about breaking and entering, which is another charge that the jury is going to have to consider during deliberations. So what do you make of this, him pointing how the gun's coming through the window, and he's literally shooting himself to break into the house?
Well, you're right, Carissa. This is the prosecution doing two things. First, they're trying to meet their burden to prove every count, every element of every offense that they've charged in the indictment. But secondly, it's very unusual to have an eyewitness, if you will, to a murder, or survivors when there's a double homicide like this, who can take the jury inside that house and really create the emotion, the panic, the fear that was created by the defendant's actions that day, and how methodical they are. If you heard what Lamar was talking about, first he heard a pop, which, you know, we see on TV, the gunshots always sound so loud, but they're really not, depending on the caliber of the gun. So he heard a pop, and it wasn't until he saw a second bullet hole that he kind of realized what was happening. So this is really taking the jury minute by minute, second by second, inside that house.
Right, and he also heard the "where is he," which led him to believe that he was the target and that he might be, you know, he may as well better run. But I think that this is key testimony about going to the burglary, because remember, this is Amanda Colley's house, where James Colley also used to live. So they have to prove to the jury that he had no right to be there, that it actually was a breaking and entering, and that he wasn't supposed to be there. So we have evidence that he's not supposed to be there, one, because there was an injunction that day, so he was supposed to stay away from her. But two, that even though this was his house at some point, that he had to go so far as to shoot himself into the house in order to gain access to the house to complete the murders and to hunt down the people that, even though he didn't actually kill the person he intended to kill, he killed two others. So this goes to clear breaking and entering. However, we do need to go back into the courtroom where there's more testimony, which is going to further explain this. So stick with us. That is testimony of Lamar Doberly, the boyfriend of one of the victims that died, Amanda Colley. And he is explaining the moments leading up to the murders and how he escaped. With me, Francey Hakes, former federal prosecutor. Francey, what do you make of his testimony?
Well, Chris, I think this is all part of the prosecution's strategy. You know, sometimes there could be other crimes incidental to a murder that a defense wants to keep out because it just makes the defendant look bad. Well, here the prosecution's strategy is clever. They've charged the defendant, Mr. Colley, with everything they could think of, including burglary and assaults and aggravated stalking. And that is designed first to tell the jury the complete tale of what occurred in the days and the moments leading up to the murders, but also to make sure they can bring in evidence of those orders against the defendant and the fact that the defendant had no right to be in the house, all of which goes to premeditation. So the state is really painting a picture.
We need to throw to a quick break, but all good points, and we're going to continue to follow this trial. And after the break, we have more testimony to listen to, so stick with us, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Law and Crime. We are continuing to follow our main trial. This is the James Colley case, the case out of Florida. It's a death penalty case, and the prosecution is still putting on their case. We've been listening to key testimony from witnesses. Before the break, we were listening to Lamar Doberly. He is the boyfriend of Amanda Colley. She's one of the victims who died. Remember, this is the case where James Colley, the defendant, went and gunned his way into the house. That's the burglary. Gunned his way into the house to then hunt down the boyfriend, Lamar Doberly, who just took the stand, but instead killed his estranged wife, Amanda Colley, who was hiding out in the bathroom, and then gunned down her best friend, Lindy Dobbins, who was hiding in a closet with another witness who escaped, Rachel Hendricks. This is a death penalty case. The prosecution is building its case. We heard that the defense was going to use an Ambien defense, that his state of mind was impaired by Ambien. But we recently learned today that they're going to be dropping that defense. However, we can probably expect to hear that defense brought up again during the sentencing phase as mitigating factors. But with me, Francey Hakes, former federal prosecutor, I wanted to ask before we go into more testimony, you and I had discussed earlier today about the Twinkie defense. And for those of you who have never heard about the Twinkie defense, that's a defense back in the trial with Harvey Milk and Dan White, really a high-profile case where it was successfully argued that there was diminished capacity because he ate too many Twinkies, and therefore he wasn't thinking clearly, and the charges were dropped down from premeditated to voluntary manslaughter because he had so many Twinkies, he didn't have the ability to form intent to be found guilty of first-degree murder. And it worked, the Twinkie defense. So why drop the Ambien defense?
Well, I think, Carissa, the Twinkie defense these days is now just symbolic of some utterly absurd claim that the defense wants to say leads to diminished capacity. In this case, like you say, they had originally been talking about using an Ambien defense. That is, he was under the influence of Ambien. And so therefore, effectively, couldn't control his actions or didn't know what he was doing, couldn't form the capacity to form intent to commit these murders so that he's ineligible effectively for the death penalty. I don't think it'll work here. I'm interested to hear that they have dropped that, but I think you're absolutely right. They will certainly bring it up during sentencing as mitigation, claiming to the jury, you can't put someone to death who didn't understand or is not fully responsible for what he's done. That's what they'll try.
Right. It's going to absolutely be brought up as a mitigating factor in sentencing if he's found guilty to help try to deter a death penalty sentence. However, I still am confused why they would drop the Ambien defense. Even if it wouldn't be successful, it was successfully argued as a Twinkie defense to prove diminished capacity, and who knows if it would have worked again.
Well, I think, Chris, in this case, the evidence is so strong. You've got the neighbor, the boyfriend, the surviving friend. The evidence is so strong that he was in a rage that day. His own father talks about how he was in a rage because of the court action taken by the wife, that I just think the Ambien defense was insulting. So this way they will be able to say to the jury that he didn't really fight the conviction itself, that he admits that he committed the crime, and so you don't have to give him the death penalty.
Right.
It's all about saving his life.
Right. But the Ambien, the side effects of the Ambien could show erratic behavior, which is consistent with the phone calls of him saying, you don't know, you're so awful. You're such an awful mother. You're lucky I don't tell the kids about you. To then, baby, please call me. Please call me. It's the last time I'm going to call you. I mean, that could also go to the Ambien defense. But all good points. We're going to go back into the courtroom right now. We're listening to Detective David Colley. He's a digital forensic examiner, and we're going to listen to all of his testimony, which goes and helps to build the prosecution's case. That's Thomas Pulley. He's the firearms analyst, and this is part of the prosecution's process in making its case and proving that the defendant is actually guilty of these murders, even though we know that he admitted it, and even though we know that Rachel Hendricks saw him hold the gun to Lindy Dobbins' head when she ran out of that closet, and even though Lamar Dauberly, who took the stand, who was the boyfriend who survived, who ran out of the house, saw him shooting his way in, this is still necessary, though draconian seeming, testimony to prove that he actually pulled the trigger and that those that those bullets that were in the gun were actually related to the gun, the trigger that he pulled. With me, Francey Hakes, former federal prosecutor. Why does the jury have to hear from a firearms expert and a DNA analyst when we know that it's not an issue whether or not he pulled the trigger? Why is that necessary?
Well, the fact, Carissa, that we know it doesn't mean that it's legally proven. And so the prosecution has to prove every element of the defense, that there was a firearm used, that the defendant was the one who pulled the trigger, that the defendant's gun were the bullets that caused the death of the victims. It's sometimes, I guess, but it's necessary, legally speaking.
Okay, it sounds like we lost you a little bit. The connection wasn't great, but you bring up all really good points. We have to go to a quick break, but we're going to come back after this break and continue listening to this testimony and then dissect it here. Thank you, Anthony. And I still can't get over this coin flip on deciding who to arrest or whether or not to arrest someone for reckless driving and speeding. Anyway, we are watching and following closely the James Colley case. This is the Florida death penalty case where James Colley is standing trial for the double murder, the murder of his wife, Amanda Colley, his estranged wife, and her best friend, Lindy Dobbins. He broke into the house. He gunned himself into the house, trying to hunt down her boyfriend, Lamar Dobbins. We've been following this testimony really closely. The state just rested. They just rested their case. With me, former federal prosecutor Francey Hakes. She's here on Skype. Francey, I want to discuss this case and whether what we can expect to see with the defense. Is she with me? I don't see her up on the screen. Okay, can we put her up so I could talk to her? Hey, Francey, I don't know if you're not on set with me. I don't know if you're with me. The defendant, is he going to take the stand? Should it be just like that flip coin toss that we saw with these officers trying to decide who to arrest? Because earlier today, you and I were in disagreement on whether or not he should take the stand. But right now, the state rested, and it's the defense's turn to put on their case and put the defendant on the stand or not put the defendant on the stand. Is it a coin toss? Should we flip a coin?
Yeah, we can flip a coin, Carissa. I'm just so shocked about the coin flip. By the way, I grew up just a couple of miles from Roswell, Georgia, where that happened. And I hate to see police officers put in such a bad light. And of course, they did it to themselves. Anyway, with respect to James Colley, I really don't think he'll take the stand. Defense attorneys like to say it's up to the client. But we all know that defense attorneys advise their client very carefully on what to do. And I think testifying is too big a risk with James Colley because it'll allow the state to cross-examine him on moment by moment, every decision that he made, every action that he took. And in light of this recent ballistic evidence, we know he fired at least 12 shots. And the medical examiner testified that Amanda Colley was lying prone during at least some of the 9 shots that he fired into her helpless body. I just can't imagine the defense attorney is going to let him take the stand and be cross-examined about those moments and those activities.
Well, you clearly would have a field day cross-examining him if the defense attorney does put him on the stand. But to the flip side of that, if you were to flip a coin, since we're going to stick to those flip terminology. The flip side of that is he could really break down on the stand and emotionally show that he's a human being and how remorseful he is and was to lose his wife and her best friend, and that something did come over him and that he wasn't himself and he was acting out of character. So that could go either way, and only the defense attorney is going to know his state of mind now whether or not that would be a good strategic move to put him on the stand. But that's something that us as viewers, us as guests, us as hosts, even the producers here, everyone, I'm sure, we're all in suspense. I mean, this is live. What's going to happen, right? Anything can happen. But it is a death penalty case, and they may or may not shed these mitigating factors until the sentencing phase. But we'll see. We'll see. Next, we're going to go to testimony in the courtroom from Rachel Hendricks. Rachel is one of the survivors. She was in the house when James Colley gunned his way into the house. He gunned his way through the sliding glass doors to hunt down Lamar Doberly, the boyfriend of Amanda Colley. But Rachel Hendricks was hiding in the closet with Lindy Dobbins when he shot through the closet door, and Rachel escaped. But before she escaped, she saw him hold the gun to Lindy's head before she ran for her life, and she called 911. So we're going to go and listen to that 911 call. That's what we're going to go to now. Welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Carissa Kranz. Today we are following our main trial, our only trial today. It's a case out of Florida. It's the James Colley case. He is standing trial for a double murder. He gunned his way into the house that he used to live in to hunt down the boyfriend of his estranged wife. Instead, he ends up killing his wife, Amanda Colley, who was hiding in the bathroom, and then proceeds to the closet where her best friend Lindy Dobbins was hiding and shoots her in the head. Meanwhile, Rachel Hendricks escapes. Before the break, we listened to her 911 call, and Lamar Doberly escaped, the boyfriend, whose testimony we're also listening to. Before we go into Lamar's testimony, I'm going to bring back on former federal prosecutor Francey Hakes, who's with me today, to give her one final opportunity to give us some final thoughts before she has to go for the day.
Thank you, Carissa. It seems to me that you're right. The prosecution has built a really strong case here, and they rested after some testimony about ballistics, the medical examiner, the 911 calls, and they're really painting a picture of a premeditated series of murders. And it'll be very interesting to see how the defense tries to counteract that if they bring witnesses and if the defendant testifies starting tomorrow.
Well, thanks, Francey, and thank you for joining us, and we look forward to having you back soon. Your thoughts are always very helpful and insightful, so thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks, Carissa.
All righty. So we're going to go into the courtroom now and listen to testimony from Lamar Doberly. Remember, he is the boyfriend of Amanda Colley, who was there when the double murders happened. However, he didn't actually witness the murders with his own eyes. He ran, he escaped, but his testimony lends insight and gives the jury some circumstantial background evidence to help prove, as Francey said, the premeditation requirement necessary to have a first-degree murder conviction, because that is important in a death penalty case. We're going to go back into the courtroom to listen to Lamar Doberly's testimony, the boyfriend.